On February 24th, 2022, Vladimir Putin announced his special military operation into Ukraine.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Ее цель – защита людей, которые на протяжении 8 лет подвергаются издевательствам, геноциду со стороны киевского режима.
This invasion is far different from that of the annexation of Crimea in 2014, with the current conflict being larger in scale and influential in how it has reshuffled the international and geopolitical landscape. When we analyze Russian foreign policy since 2000, military operations are actually a relatively rare occurrence and usually restrictive in scale, targeted in geographic areas that are local, with arguably the last large-scale conflict involving Russia being World War II. For reference, since 2000, excluding the current war in Ukraine, Russia has been involved in 6 conflicts compared to the United States' 12. So the question remains, what has caused Russia to take this seemingly large departure from this trend? For this, we will have to examine Russia's foreign policy and how it is being influenced by one of the most important national security concerns, Ukraine. There are 2 identifiable and integral variables that drive Russia's foreign policy since 2014, and more specifically in the context of Ukraine. They are 1. Russia's need for recognition in the international community as a relevant great power, and more importantly, 2. Preserving the protection of its sovereign security and its spheres of influence, and the upholding of the status quo. When discussing Ukraine, primarily the lead-up to the annexation of Crimea in 2014 to present, what is inevitably unveiled is how interwoven the West and more importantly NATO's role has been in shaping Russia's foreign policy rhetoric and importantly Russia's perception of a new Ukrainian identity that increasingly identifies more with the West. In fact, in recent years, many in Russia and abroad could point to the most influential variable in anticipating Russian foreign policy towards Ukraine as being NATO's perceived hardening and eastern expansion into countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Sweden, Finland, and importantly, Ukraine. Russia's foreign policy is mobilized by the interpretation of an eroding sphere of influence in the post-Soviet space that takes form in its security concerns. This trepidation is predicated on a continental outward expansion vis-a-vis the unleashing of soft and hard power through diplomacy, economic pressure, threats, or military means with the aim of preempting foreign subversion. In that the control of territory, whether it be through annexation or the establishment of integrated allies on its peripheries, will inhibit the West from exploiting Ukraine as supposed attacking points into Russia. Ukraine's drift into Western alignment is, without question, the biggest guiding influence on Russian foreign policy posturing. The 2 previously mentioned variables of Russian foreign policy are seemingly challenged. Russia has a proclivity to largely associate Western alignment with a corrosive intention to impede on Russia's sphere of influence. And that Ukrainian desire to depart from Russia's orbit subverts Russian security ambitions, the status quo, and also Russia's perceived great power status. For the aforementioned reasons, Russia showcases its political and military concerns by continuously attempting to insert itself as a hegemonizing power in Ukraine. The dual Russian invasions of Ukraine in 2014 and 2022 are strategically important for Russian foreign policy goals. Russia uses the conflict to dictate and limit the extent in which Ukraine can engage in bilateralism, the most important one to Russia being NATO, by locking Ukraine in a long protracted conflict that complicates succession. In other words, according to Sharp, Russian use of force is best understood as a means of coercion, and that Thomas Schelling's theory of military coercion classifies coercive military acts as either deterrence, aimed at preventing adversary behaviors, or compellence, threatening or taking action to force the adversary to induce compliance. In a way, we see Russia facing Ukraine in the same way that we would see it face NATO, that a victory over Ukraine would also undermine the alliance. The goal of Russia's war is to curtail the extent in which NATO can expand into Ukraine and the rest of Eastern Europe, and while at the same time fortifying its influence and see the potentiality of bringing Ukraine back into line. Russia may see this as an opportunity to seize the moment. Instead, we observe the enlargement of NATO and the diminishing of Russian influence over Ukraine. We also see Russia's underestimation of Ukrainian resolve and also NATO support, which partly leaves a reasonable interpretation that Russian foreign policy in Ukraine is victim to serious miscalculations.